Okay, hello and welcome everyone. So in this video, I'm going to talk about strong reciprocity. Again, I always got a picture of my dog because that's what's going to happen. That's what's going to be in the thumbnail of this video on my desktop. That's going to help me. It's not going to mean so much to you, except for maybe for this one because so we could tell a reciprocity story, right? I can get this ball, I can help Ani out, I can give her the ball, and then presumably we might expect she'd do something nice for me, like, I don't know, bring the ball back, or if I throw it, she'll go and get it and retrieve it, being a retriever and all. Although, that's actually not true to life. It's the type of dog where you throw the ball and she's really good at chasing after it, not at all good at bringing it back. And so, anyway, sort of game theory joke, it'd be sort of like a one-shot iteration of the game is what Ani wants to play, not repeated games. So, anyway, here's the three references that sort of provide the foundation for this lecture. And I'm going to start off thinking about the sort of standard economic model and some implications that come from it. So we typically assume economic agents are selfish and rational, right? So we talked about selfish and rational in some of the other lectures. Now here's two implications that would come from the standard model of like self-regarding preferences. And we notice that this falls into conflict with observed empirical behavior. So firstly, one of the consequences of the standard econ model would be people ought to care only about the outcome and not the process. Well, that's obviously not true. People care quite a bit about the process. The standard model would say it shouldn't matter if the result came from bargaining, from coercion, from chance, from voluntary transfer, or whatever. You know, obviously in real life, people care quite a bit about the process. And so this is sort of one sort of conflict with observed behavior. Another issue is like, we'd expect if people are indeed selfish and rational, they should care only about what's happened to them, gains and losses, not about the nature of how that came to be. That was part one. And also not about what's happened to other people, nor how other people's actions and might have been influenced by intentions leading to whatever is the outcome. That doesn't hold true in all cases either. Obviously, people care quite a bit about, firstly, what's the process by which an outcome resulted? Secondly, quite a bit about, well, was this intentional or unintentional, right? Both in terms of whether there's a positive or negative outcome, right? If somebody does something nice to you by accident, you think differently about them than if they do something nice to you on purpose. And similarly for the bad outcome. So as I developed in the altruism lecture, continue on here where I want to show in kind of a lot of cases we can handle reciprocity in a standard economic model. As a matter of fact, we can motivate that here where we don't necessarily need like other regarding preferences or behavioral economics to get us something that looks like reciprocity. In some cases we can, other cases we can't. I'll kind of walk through and show us this. And we saw that with altruism as well. The basic idea is I kind of want to motivate a situation where we can see kind of a wide variety of economic behavior we wouldn't typically have expected would fall under the umbrella of the standard economic model. And nevertheless, like in altruism, in reciprocity, we can bring in behavioral economics. You just don't necessarily need to, depending on what's the question or what's the phenomena that you're trying to explore. Indeed, definitely, behavioral economics is super useful for examining reciprocity. That's a third of my dissertation. But anyway, so all right. So strong reciprocity, it's a predisposition to cooperate with others and to punish at personal cost if necessary those who violate the norms of cooperation, even when implausible to expect the costs will be recovered at a later date. So, okay, definitely in economics, it's important to be kind of really to be careful about the precision of definitions and to try to appreciate and realize the precision of these definitions. So actually, like everything in this definition is really important to distinguish us from other forms of reciprocity. Strong reciprocity specifically is looking at a situation where people have a predisposition to cooperate with others and to punish those who are violating norms of cooperation, even when it's implausible to expect the costs will be recovered at a later date. And that's the part that helps us actually in a lot of cases distinguish strong reciprocity from other forms of reciprocity. It's easy to pick out because somebody who's motivated by strong reciprocity will exhibit reciprocal preferences even when they themselves won't benefit in the future. Right, so strong reciprocity remains effective even in non-repeated and anonymous situations, because we're looking at situations precisely when it's implausible to expect that you're making an investment that you're going to recover, you'll withdraw in the future. We're looking at a situation where people are willing to incur actually great personal cost for the sake of like enforcing norms. Okay, so first off, we recognize that people are often neither self-regarding nor altruistic entirely in their behavior. Like we're often not entirely motivated by selfish motivations, nor are people often entirely motivated by purely altruistic motivations. In a lot of cases, we see things that kind of fall in the middle. When we're talking about strong reciprocity, we're looking at those who are conditional cooperators, who behave altruistically as long as others do so as well. So conditional cooperation is if other people around me are cooperating, I'll cooperate. Their strong reciprocators are also altruistic punishers. So these are those who are going to apply sanctions. They're going to engage in costly punishment to those who are behaving unfairly according to whatever are the prevalent norms of cooperation. So if people are violating this cooperation norm, those who are motivated by altruistic punishment will go ahead and will punish to enforce the norm. However, those who are motivated strictly by conditional cooperation would just simply stop cooperating. So that's interesting, right? So thinking about like the different levels of sort of being engaged in whatever is the situation. Are you continuing to cooperate? Have you withdrawn your willingness to cooperate? Or have you not only that, but are now willing to go out of your way to punish, right? There's kind of like 3 different types of behavior that we can observe there. To have strong reciprocity, we actually need both conditional cooperation and altruistic punishment. Okay, so let's try to illustrate this in the context, firstly, of the Ultimatum Game. So in the altruism lecture slides, I introduced the dictator game. So the dictator game is where a proposer, well, the dictator has $10 and they decide whether to give and then how much to some recipient, right? So in the dictator game, I've got $10, I can give 0 up to 10 to the other person, and the other person just takes whatever I've given them, and that's the end of the game. Well, in the ultimatum game, this now gives the recipient some recourse. We now call the recipient a responder. So what's happening now is we've got a proposer, no longer a dictator. We've got a proposer who's offering some amount, some X between 0 and $10, typically, to the responder, who then has the opportunity to either accept or reject the offer. If they accept, they split the offer accordingly. If they reject, they both get 0, right? All right, so that's our setup for the ultimatum game. Now, what typically happens? First, let's think about the theoretical structure. Then let's think about like what experimental evidence tends to show. So the theoretical equilibrium, if the game's played just once, is that the proposer should offer the smallest offer that'll be accepted. Actually, the theoretical prediction is you should be able to offer like 0, right? It should be the case. Not only here we've got the self-regarding responder is for sure going to accept anything greater than 0. And actually, if we offer 0, truthfully, the self-regarding responder should be indifferent between an offer of 0 and rejecting, right? Because if I don't care about the process, if I only care about the outcomes, an offer of 0 is exactly the same as an accepted offer of 0 is exactly the same as a rejected offer of 0, right? All right, so, but anyway, if you're uncomfortable with that, we'll just say, well, any self-regarding responder should accept any positive offer. Therefore, an offer of like a penny should be accepted. Okay, so the proposer, knowing this, offers, let's say, $1 that'll be accepted, or whatever is the smallest denomination that they're able to make. What are the actual results? Well, only a minority of agents actually behave in self-regarding manner. There's been replications under a lot of different considerations in different economies even, so that $10 is a lot more money, or so that, so, all right, so as you're thinking about experimental economics, what happens is you've got to have a research budget, right? You've got to have maybe a grant, if you're paying out of pocket, or your university is giving you some funds to be able to run these experiments, however is the case. If you run the experiments in the United States or in Europe, you've typically you're paying a show-up fee to students, because it's typically undergrad students. And a typical show-up fee for an experiment would be somewhere in the range of like $5, €5 I've seen in different papers. And so that can really kind of cut into your research budget. But if you take your research budget and then you have a colleague at a university in a developing country, now all of a sudden, two things. Firstly, you can stretch your research budget a lot further. Secondly, now you're playing for a sum of money that becomes kind of substantially larger than, say, $10 that students may or may not view as large enough to take seriously. Anyway, so there's been a lot of replications under varying conditions, varying the amounts of money, and typically proposers offer substantial amounts. As a matter of fact, the modal offer is 50-50. This seems to call to mind some type of fairness norm, at least to me as well. Or anyway, so respondents tend to reject offers below 30%. That's interesting. And these are pretty stable findings across the ultimatum game. Proposers tend to offer somewhere around 50-50, not too far from 40-60, 60-40 when they do deviate, and respondents tend to reject offers below 30%. So you can see a whole range of papers or Google Scholar or whatever is the case. So even so, we see significant individual differences in how subjects play. You'll get some people who are offering 0, some who are offering the full 10, everything you can imagine. But a substantial fraction is self-regarding, approximately like 25%. So self-regarding would be like typically, relatively speaking, maybe the most unfair offer that you're expecting to get accepted, essentially. And average performance similar across other countries, as I mentioned. All right, so the results from the ultimatum game actually seem to confirm the strong reciprocity model, seem to provide us support for it. So we probably expect fair would be 50-50, and we see responders tend to reject offers below 40%. We see 30% really tends to be rejected, and this seems to be a form of altruistic punishment for a proposer who has violated the fairness norm of 50-50, right? So you think of like, why would the theoretical prediction is like if you offer 30%, you offer $3. Theoretical prediction is that responders should be pretty excited about those $3, right? Because theory is telling us that they should actually accept $1 or 1 penny. Okay, so nevertheless, we have a lot of responders who are rejecting those $3 or rejecting anything under $4 or whatever. So why would you do this? Well, you're willing to sacrifice these $4 or those $3 to be able to reinforce this fairness norm, right? To punish. So this is altruistic punishment for violating the fairness norm. Similarly, it's not just the responders that are aware of this norm, the proposers know as well. Proposers tend to offer the 50-50 split. That was the modal offer, most frequent offer. Why? Well, because they're altruistic cooperators, or because they fear that there's going to be rejection. So if we could try to distinguish in data between altruistic cooperators or those who are worried about rejection as being the difference between a 50-50 offer and a 60-40 offer or 40-60 offer, right? Further, if the offer in the ultimatum game comes from a computer and respondents know this, low offers are rarely rejected. That's really interesting, right? If you know that the offer has come from a human proposer, now it makes sense to either reciprocate and to give them, in the ultimatum game, there's not, so you'd accept the offer and then you're being kind to them, you're reciprocating in the sense that you're getting whatever they've offered, you're allowing them to get whatever they're getting. More typically, we'd say like negative reciprocity in the ultimatum game, because if somebody gives you an unkind offer, you'll kind of be unkind to them by rejecting it, and then therefore depriving them of the $7 or $8 that they were trying to get for themselves. But if you're playing against a computer, now it doesn't seem to make as much sense to try to reinforce a fairness norm for a computer, right, or for software, right? Also, we expect that, or there's evidence suggesting that, well, players are motivated by reciprocity. They're reacting to a behavioral norm that's been violated. All right, so if we're trying to identify strong reciprocity, what we're looking for is somebody who's willing to sacrifice resources to be kind to those who are being kind. So as I was talking about like positive reciprocity, that's like strong positive reciprocity. and they're willing to sacrifice resources to punish those who are unkind. That's strong negative reciprocity, right? So I was talking about positive reciprocity, being nice to those, being nice to you, and then negative reciprocity being harming those who are harming you, right? All right, so this essential feature, or the essential feature, is this willingness to sacrifice resources for rewarding fair and for punishing unfair behavior, even if this is costly and provides neither present nor future material rewards for the reciprocator. I mean, that definitely happens in the case of negative reciprocity in the Ultimatum game. Not so much for strong positive reciprocity, right? Because if they make an offer and I accept the offer, well, I actually am getting a present material reward. However, if I reject an unfair offer, this is costly to myself and provides neither present nor future material rewards for the reciprocator, unless you're expecting to play against that same person in another Ultimatum game. But that's typically not the expectation. All right, so whether an action is perceived as fair or unfair depends on the distributional consequences of the action relative to some neutral reference action. So in the Rabin paper, he's thinking about the equitable payoff, which lies halfway in between the best and worst that you could get. In the Ultimatum game, we're thinking about fairness as being the 50-50 split, right? And then we're judging fairness or unfairness relative to the 50-50 split. All right, so we're expecting many people actually exhibit strong reciprocity, and actually those who are motivated by strong reciprocity or have behavior that's consistent with strong reciprocity actually improves the prospects for cooperation within that population, right? As a matter of fact, in a population of individuals, you can get nearly maximal cooperation. Even if the standard repeated interaction approach, the theoretical underpinnings would predict no cooperation. If you have strong reciprocators present, you can get quite a bit of cooperation if this is a repeated interaction. Also, there's institutions and social structures where actually the interaction of reciprocally fair persons and purely selfish persons can induce the majority to cheat. That's the interesting thing now, is that you can go in the other direction. You can have strong reciprocators, and if you have enough people who are purely selfish, strong reciprocators will end up cheating as well, right? All right, so we want to think of strong reciprocity as being distinct from reciprocal altruism and from standard altruism. So altruistic actions, or altruistic actors, those motivated by altruism, ought to be unconditionally kind, right? Their kindness shouldn't be conditioned, shouldn't depend on others' behavior. Reciprocal altruism are those who are conditioning their behavior on the previous behavior of the other actor. So if you're kind to me, I'll be kind to you. Right? So this looks kind of a lot like positive reciprocity. So they're willing to help another person, though incurring short-run costs, but only because they're expecting future long-term benefits. Right? All right, so we can actually illustrate this in the context of a sequential prisoner's dilemma. So hopefully bring this to life a little bit more. So we'll have one player, person A, who's deciding between defect and cooperate. So D and C for defect and cooperate. The payoffs to players A, or to player A and to player B, are defined as 5-5, right? So 5 is the payoff to player A, 5 is the payoff to player B, if our strategy profile is cooperate. Player A gets 2, player B gets 2, if our strategy profile is defect. Player A gets 0, player B gets 7 if A cooperates and B defects. And then if whoever's the one to defect when your co-player cooperates gets 7. Right? All right. So here's the game tree. This is what this looks like. Oh, and then I realized here I was calling player A and player B, and now I've got player 1 and player 2. Good. So player A, player 1's choosing to cooperate. If player 1 cooperates and player 2 cooperates, we're at 5-5. We're at cooperate, payoffs of 5 for each. Whoever defects, if the other cooperates, gets 7. Yep, that's right here, because the second payoff goes to the second player, to player B. And then here, whoever defects gets 7, unless you both defect, in which case you get 2. All right, so that's our game. Let me just go back to this so we can realize that this is the same. So just since since I said A and since I said B, I want to make sure that we know where those would be located on this game. Just in case I don't want don't want to confuse anyone. So just in case, this would be player A would start us off, and player B would observe would observe player A's choice and then would make their own selection. All right, good. So here's our analysis. If player B is altruistic, B never selects D, even if A selects D, right? An altruistic player B should never defect, right? Because we said altruism, our altruistic behavior is going to be unconditionally kind behavior, right? So if B is motivated by strong reciprocity, actually B should choose to defect if A chooses to defect, but should choose C, should cooperate if A cooperates, right? Our strong reciprocator is going to be a conditional cooperator, conditionally altruistic, right? So what's going to happen here is our strong reciprocator is going to cooperate if A has cooperated, but they're also going to be an altruistic punisher, meaning the person motivated by strong reciprocity is going to be willing to sacrifice resources to reward kind behavior. They're going to defect if the co-player has defected. Indeed, yeah, there is a sacrifice here, because what happens is if the other player defects, now you're going to defect, and so we're sort of undermining the scope for cooperation. All right, so a cooperative act by player A, despite the material incentive to cheat, is going to be a good example of kindness, right? Kindness of the strong reciprocator is conditional on the perceived kindness of the other player. So reciprocal altruism is different. With reciprocal altruism, we're going to be cooperation. We're going to observe cooperation only if there's future returns from cooperation, and so we'd expect our strong reciprocator is gonna be a cooperating player one, but we'd expect that a person who's reciprocally altruistic will actually be a defecting player one, right? Interesting. So our reciprocal altruism is actually going to be selfish, because our person who's reciprocally altruistic will defect as player one, then cooperate as player two if player one has cooperated. Our strong reciprocator is actually going to cooperate from the outset. All right, so reciprocity is different from cooperative or the retaliatory behavior in repeated interaction, right? So what's happening with strong reciprocity is that we're not assuming any shadow of the future. However, in a repeated interaction game, we might expect that there's scope for cooperation, and that's going to look a little bit different. There's also retaliation, that's going to look a little bit different, right? So reciprocity, so these right here, cooperative and retaliatory behavior, arise in response to this sort of expectation of future material benefits, right? With reciprocity, the actor is responding, though, to friendly or hostile actions, even if there's no future material gains, which is different from altruism, because altruism is unconditional kindness, right? Altruism does not emerge as responding to altruism received, right? Altruism is just unconditional. It's just kindness for the sake of kindness. Reciprocity, it's a response to beneficial or to harmful acts. So let me see this again now in the context of a public good game. So I want to introduce, actually, so I've chosen the game forms actually kind of for important reasons. We need to be introduced to the dictator game. We saw that in the altruism slides. We need to know the ultimatum game. We saw that in these slides. We need to know the prisoner's dilemma, because that'll figure into the cooperation slides that I'll talk about in the future. We need to know about public goods, because this public goods structure comes back in a later lecture. It's in the Jacobson and Delaney Jacobson paper that I'll talk about much later in the course. So anyway, in some other places. And so we need these game forms. These will come back. This is important. So, all right, a standard sort of setup for a public goods experimental laboratory version of a public goods game. So we have 4 members, each endowed with 20 tokens. Each is going to simultaneously decide to allocate tokens. So they're not observing what their co-players have done. If you just hold on to your token and you don't contribute anything, you keep your 20 tokens, right? Privately held tokens earn a return of 1 token. Publicly donated tokens earn a return of a 0.4 tokens to everyone, whether they're invested or not. Right? So everybody, if I donate a token, I lose a token. Now I've got 19, but I'm going to get back 0.4. Everybody's going to be distributed 0.4 tokens for every one that's contributed. All right, so the private return of the token donated to the public good is 0.4, right? So that's not great. I'm going to donate my token. I lose ultimately 0.6, right? Because I've donated 1, I get back 0.4. The social return is 1.6 tokens though, because everybody gets that 0.4, right? When I donate a token, I only get 0.4, but not only that happens, the 3 other people get 0.4 tokens as well. So the social return is 1.6 tokens. The cost is always 1, so material self-interest tells me that I ought not donate to the public good. If everyone keeps, which is the Nash equilibrium, everyone earns 20 tokens. However, if everyone invests, each would earn 32 tokens, right? So the socially efficient outcome is for everybody to invest. What do I want to do? I want everybody else to invest, and I want to keep my 20 tokens and then add to this the return from everybody else. Problem is, if everybody's motivated that way, nobody ends up investing to the public good, and then we get kind of the standard underinvestment in the public good outcome. All right, so anyway, this public goods mechanism is going to allow us to illustrate 2 forms of reciprocity. We have positive reciprocity and negative reciprocity we discussed earlier on. So positive reciprocity, well, subjects are willing to contribute if others do. We're viewing contribution as a kind act. This induces reciprocally motivated people to behave kind as well and to contribute. Negative reciprocity is, if I observe everybody else free riding, I'm going to free ride myself, right? I'm going to see this as a hostile act. I'm going to punish by also free riding, by not contributing. So the self-interested agents are going to free ride out of their own self-interest. The reciprocal actors will free ride because they've observed others free riding. In the end, the behavior is indistinguishable. Now, the influence of negative reciprocity is different if there's punishment. So suppose we want to introduce punishment. Now we can be able to see this influence of negative reciprocity a little bit different in our behavior, right? If there's no punishment, we're going to see both the selfish actor free riding and those who are reciprocally motivated free riding. Everybody's going to free ride. If anybody free rides, everybody's going to free ride. So that's a problem. But suppose we introduce the scope for punishment now. Punishment beyond just withholding contribution to the public good, right? Suppose now participants can reduce the income of a group member by X at a cost of, say, 1/3 X to the punisher, right? So I can reduce payoffs at a cost of 30% of whatever is that payoff. If we're all self-interested, the contribution level should be unaffected by the ability to punish, right? Because if I'm self-interested, I'm not going to punish because that's just hurting myself for no reason. However, those who are negatively reciprocal are going to be willing to pay to punish. You can think of these individuals as like buying punishment, right? That happens. We see this in the legal sphere all the time. So we see situations where people are willing to uphold a principle, even if it's between like another business partner or something like that. So my brother's an attorney and obviously can't talk about specific cases, and I don't with me or anyone else, obviously, but says, yeah, indeed, we see this where you might have a client who's willing to, or the other person's client might be willing to engage in whatever is the lawsuit, even though the only one that's going to not lose is the attorney. And the attorney stated this. They say, hey, look, the only one who's going to come out with any material benefit from this is me. The easiest thing is for you just to settle. Sometimes people don't want to do this. Why? Well, maybe they're motivated by this negative reciprocity. They're willing to pay to be able to punish the other person for their transgression. All right, so this can induce the self-interested agents to contribute to avoid punishment. Fair-Schmidt, 1999. So this is the Fair-Schmidt preferences. This is like they introduced these weird sort of inequality aversion preferences. That's that paper. But anyway, so what they show is a situation where you can get a minority of reciprocally motivated agents can make a majority of selfish agents end up cooperating. I should move this a little bit higher. So this is implemented in the context of an interesting repeated game, or interesting repeated public goods game. So in this paper, we have a perfect stranger treatment, we have a partner treatment, and then we have a duration for a repeated game. So this is in the context of this public goods game. In the perfect stranger treatment, you repeat 6 periods of this public goods game with new groups such that nobody met another group member more than one time. So there's no future rewards. This is actually perfect grounds to look for strong reciprocity, right? And then we have a partner treatment. You have the same group repeated 10 times. So now it's possible, there's possible strategic spillovers because your present actions can affect future payoffs if you can convince or unconvince your co-players to cooperate. All subjects know the length of the game in advance. All right, well, here's what they found. Negative deviations from the other's average contribution is a significant determination of punishment, right? If somebody contributes less than average, that's somebody who's going to get punished in the future, right? The more subject free rides relative to others, the more they get punished, right? It kind of seems like we're seeing evidence of negative reciprocity. Matter of fact, the same pattern is observed in both treatments, both the perfect stranger treatment and in the partner treatment. Free riders were punished irrespective of whether future rewards could be accrued to the punisher. Then they had questionnaires to determine the motives and actually confirm the deviations from, it was deviating relative to this norm of cooperation, ended up causing resentment and then triggered the punishment impulse in the experiment. In the absence of the punishment opportunity, the average cooperation collapsed to pretty low levels in later periods. That's pretty standard in a repeated public goods game. Typically, people start off cooperating and then they tend to free ride at the end of the game. And so this finding right here is kind of, so it's good for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to set up what they do later in the paper. But, you know, when you're reading somebody's experimental paper, you actually kind of want to see in their baseline treatment that things are going kind of the direction that's been shown in a lot of literature. So like if we didn't see this in their paper, you might be worried about some of the other findings, but or in anybody's paper, right? But the fact that they showed indeed when there's no punishment, our experiment looked like everybody else's, good. So then we're on the right track. Then they show in the perfect stranger treatment, 79% free rided completely, right? The rest contributed very little, but with the punishment, the contribution stabilized at high levels, right? So if they did perfect strangers with no punishment, it kind of looked like, we have a lot of people that were free riding completely. But if we had perfect strangers with punishment, actually contributions stabilized to pretty high levels. That's evidence for strong reciprocity. Now with partner treatment, they almost converge to maximum contribution even in the final period, right? Contributing nearly 90% even in the final period. So this is showing actually a couple things. First off, we got evidence for strong reciprocity in the first one because there's no shadow of the future. In the second one, now we see, the importance of reinforcing cooperation and reputation and in repeated games and so on and so forth. And so that's interesting as well. So this is kind of a cool experiment, kind of cool paper. So anyway, the last thing I want to do is think about, maybe I should have talked about this a little bit earlier, but thinking about norms. Well, no, because we were talking about the fairness norm. Now we'll just talk about social norms more generally. So our definition of social norms, kind of reinforced by strong reciprocity, and then think about norms elsewhere in the course. By social norms, we're thinking of a behavioral regularity pattern based on a socially shared belief of how one ought to behave, right? It can't just be me. It's got to be like everybody's got the same belief that we're kind of coordinating on, that triggers an enforcement of behavior by informal social sanctions, even at immediate cost to oneself, right? So it's got to be a behavioral pattern that we're all aware of, and we all believe everybody should be following, and where we're going to enforce this behavior by informal social sanctions, right, within the groups on a decentralized sort of basis, even at a cost to oneself, right? So that's what we mean by social norms, right? Social norms are reinforced socially, right? We're not talking about legal norms, not talking about legal status or necessarily anything outside that would be like a formal social structure. Here we're thinking about like an informal social sanction where people are reinforcing the social norm or whatever is the norm. Like we saw this with the fairness norm. And that's what we have in mind. We're thinking about social norms. All right, that's the end of the slides here. I'll go ahead and conclude. Hope you enjoyed the video, and then I'll see you in the next one.